go. Okay, it's connecting on my software. It takes a few seconds to go through and connect on mine. It says we're live. It says the internet can totally see you now. I am not seeing it on my repeater. Do you see anything on your on that repeater you have there on that channel?
No, I just see you just like you were a moment ago.
Okay. Okay. No, that's old. Uh-oh. This is the other one. Refresh. Maybe it's still a learning experience. Okay, it looks like we're live now. All right. Okay, if anybody's out there, maybe just talking to myself, but I'd like you to welcome you to FlyWire's live stream. First attempt, so no excuses. Our guest today is Jeff Boehm. We're going to talk about the broken aileron cable that led directly to the AD 19-21-08, and it was a pretty significant event. So having that AD probably saved some lives. And what I'm going to do, and since it's my show, I'm going to ask questions of Jeff. And then after we're done talking about stuff like that, right towards the end, I guess in about 30 minutes or so, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience if we have any questions on chat. So looking forward to it. So first of all, let's get to know Jeff. Let's pull him up on screen, and Jeff can say hello. There you go, Jeff, you're up.
Hey, how you doing, Scott? Thanks for having me on FlyWire.
You bet. Thanks for being here. I think the best thing to do is just tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into flying, and how did all that start for you?
Well, I've loved aviation my whole life. I don't have any family members that were pilots, but I remember a story I told you when I was in the 6th grade. I saw a picture of an F-15 poster at the book fair, and that kind of did it for me right then and there. So wanted to be a military pilot. Unfortunately, I don't have the eyesight for it. So started flying at 12 at a small uncontrolled grass field. A friend of the family's had a 172, and I could just use that for gas. And ended up doing, the whole deal, solo on the 16th birthday and private on the 17th and all that stuff. Went on to a career in business aviation. I fly corporately for a Part 91 private company, Gulfstream 550 and Challenger 350. Love flying. I love GA, and got back into GA about 3 years ago. My wife and I picked up a V-tail Bonanza V35 66, serial number 82003, and love the way that airplane flies. Probably the best flying airplane I've ever flown. We love taking trips in it and taking family out in it. So it's just been an amazing airplane and an amazing group of people I've met as a result of owning that airplane.
That's very cool. I like Bonanzas. My first airplane, I had a P-35. It was a lot of fun. I got that when I was in the Air Force. So tell us about your day job and then how you got back into GA.
Well, like I said, I fly 91 on the Gulfstream and the Challenger. It's just typical corporate flying, kind of non-scheduled. It's all Part 91. And we do mostly domestic operations. We do some Europe and Asia, South America, Canada, typical stuff like that. And I've been there about 20 years now, and just started to get a little burned out with doing the same missions over and over. I love the airplanes. They're great airplanes, but I missed, kind of the visceral feel that you get with the smaller GA airplanes. So I'd always loved Beechcraft. I've got a friend of mine who's got a 58 Baron, and I'd flown Bonanzas. And so when we started looking at aircraft in our price range, I was stunned that we could pick up this V-tail. To me, it's one of the best looking airplanes ever made. And I think we have a 1,280 pound useful load, and 165 knots on 12 gallons an hour. I mean, what's not to like? So that's kind of how we got into that airplane. And what I found was that hands-on flying really kind of reignited my passion again for aviation and made my day job flying even better and more fulfilling, if you will. So that's kind of my whole story with that.
It's actually funny, but the when I was in the military and then later on in the airlines, the number of guys that it was a job, it turned into a job for them. There wasn't really that many folks that loved GA flying and loved to keep into it, and which is a shame. So glad to see you back in the GA world. That's what's fun.
Really glad to be here.
Yeah, cool. Well, then I think you should tell us about your aileron break and how that happened in flight.
Wow, that was quite a day. Obviously, with a career in aviation, I've had engine failures and emergencies and hydraulic issues. None of them affected me quite the way this one did, because at all the other situations, it just felt like use the training, fly the airplane, never a question about getting it on the ground. And with this particular incident, it was a little different. But basically, the airplane has about 3,400 hours on it. We hooked up with an ABS shop for our first annual. We still use that shop to this day. We put GAMIs and an engine monitor in at this annual. So this particular flight was supposed to be our first test flight with the GAMIs, with the engine monitor, a lean test, that whole drill. So fortunately, a friend of mine had never been in a V-tail. He had an A36, asked if he could go along, and he had GAMIs and the same engine monitor, the EI MVP 50. So welcomed him aboard. Always do welcome somebody along. A second set of eyes and somebody to help with the radios is always there. So took off out of Fort Lauderdale Executive on an afternoon. It was a Friday afternoon. But the plan was to head out west, 8,000 feet or so, and go through that GAMI test and just shake out the airplane after annual. Part of the pattern westbound, climbing, underneath just to the north of the Class Charlie there. So we leveled off, stayed below the Charlie, headed out to the west, accelerated up to about 150 knots or so. And then we started a climbing left turn to the south west, basically, to start that climb. And as I rolled into the turn, the airplane, the yoke just suddenly snapped and went far over center, quite a bit over center. And at that exact moment, the airplane began a fairly abrupt turn to the right. So there was a moment there where, your hands know what's going on, your eyes can see what's going on, but your brain just refuses to accept what's actually happening, And the guy I was flying with, his name is Dennis, he looks at me and he goes, what are you doing? And I said, I think we lost our ailerons. And at that point, I looked out at the left wing and I could see the left aileron at 0, and looked at the right wing, and the right aileron's, full deflection up. And so in comes the training and the instinct, and that's fly the airplane, and the only thing I had that could help in this situation was rudder. So I started working in the rudder, ended up going full rudder, locked my knee, basically like you would on a VMC cut, and was able to get the airplane to fly relatively wings level in a pretty exaggerated slip with about, full ball deflection to one side and about 3 to 5 degrees bank the other direction. And the airplane was flying fine, My heart rate is funny. I have an Apple Watch. Back and looked at it afterwards, had gone up through the roof. I think I was at 180 beats a minute during this event. And as we started to settle down, realized the airplane is now under control, it became the question of how do we get it back on the ground? So we talked about it, and a left turn wasn't happening. Basically, full left rudder yielded, or 95% left rudder yielded wings level-ish. So the decision was made, make a right turn back around to the airport. And in my previous training events, if you've got a flyable airplane, stick with what you got. So the airspeed, I looked at it, noted it, and we began a slight right turn to the right. I notified ATC that I lost, aileron control, declared the emergency requested priority handling, and planned on coming back to runway 8 at executive. At that point, we briefed how this thing might happen. We had a full load of avgas on board, and with the exaggerated slip that was required, the crab that was required to maintain relatively level flight, there was going to be a side load on the landing gear. So we briefed, possible gear collapse and what could happen with that, and getting the door open and all of those things. And so as we make our way back around, I started to realize my leg's just not going to make it. I can't handle this. It's too much pressure on my leg. So Dennis offered to take the airplane. So I transitioned the yoke, the rudder actually, over to him. I maintained the yoke. It's a throwover on my side for elevator, and he was working the rudder. And he was quite surprised to find that it was indeed, full left rudder to keep the airplane from rolling to the right. So long story short, a big right turn back around. Fortunately, we had a pretty decent crosswind of about 12 to 15 knots out of the south for landing on runway 9. And as we brought it in on about a 30-degree angle to the runway, we started to reduce power to slow down and bring the gear down. And this is the point at which I realized that as I slowed the airspeed down, I would lose rudder effectiveness, which could then result in a loss of control of the airplane again. So as I hit the stop on the left rudder and realized I had no more, airspeed became my friend again. So a little bit of power, speed back up, and at that point throw out the landing gear, and kind of made the decision not to monkey with flaps. Coming in, and honestly, that's a far different approach speed. Now we're coming in at 120 knots. I think it was 120, 25 knots or something about that. Substantially more energy on the airplane than you're used to carrying into a landing event. Not what I wanted to do, but obviously controllability is the concern. Brought the airplane in and, did my best to get the wings as level as they could be. Apparently, Dennis told me he looked over at me as I was coming in, and I was, just going crazy on those ailerons. My mind just wouldn't let go of the idea that they were there. You can't stop with that yoke, To my surprise, the landing wasn't a smooth landing by any event, but the airplane didn't bounce. We stuck it on the runway. I pushed forward on the yoke, got on the left brake and straightened it out, and no damage to the airplane, rolled out, and hands shaken, stomach not, taxied back to the hangar. And then that was kind of the end of it. So
that's an awesome story. I imagine your leg was shaking a little bit too.
Oh yeah. I mean, you add the adrenaline in there, and the fatigue from pushing that hard on the rudder. I mean, there was a lot going on, but the key takeaway, the thing that I think, I've told a few people this story, and I think it's super important is, and I heard you say this the other day, Scott, I think you mentioned something about Churchill, is it never give up. Don't quit flying the airplane just because the airplane doesn't do what you want, doesn't do what you expect, doesn't respond the way you anticipate. If you just sit there and stop, then it could be the end of you. It could be the end of your flight. So, fly it, like Hoover says, right? Fly it all the way into the crash if you have to.
Absolutely. Well, it
that's
sounds like
the
you did
most
an
important
excellent
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You did an excellent job. And back in the Air Force, my Air Force days, we used to have a thing about if you had some sort of issue like a flight control, which had happened because we had hydraulic controls, and if you'd lost one hydraulic system, you might not have an aileron or a spoiler or something like that. So we always did a thing called a controllability check. So what's the lowest speed that you can fly and maintain level controlled flight? And while you didn't, I don't think you thought about what you did as a controllability check, but that's what you did, right? Got to about 120 knots, and this is all I can do, so this is what we're going to do. So that's
yeah. I guess you could say it wasn't a planned event, but that's how it ended up,
Yeah,
And
you got to do what's necessary.
the rudder is absolutely, and the people I talk to, it seems like people, especially the Bonanza group, where you have aileron rudder interconnect, they kind of get used to not using the rudder so much. And if you don't have experience with twins or in tailwheel airplanes, maybe you're not used to using your rudders so much. But in some of the more advanced training I've done, some upset training at flight safety and unusual attitude training and aerobatic airplanes and things, the rudder is so important. And that flight control is often backed up in 2 and 3 fold and redundancy. And it's a flight control that I think people really need to use and think about and never underestimate how much the rudder can do for you, you know.
Absolutely. I think a really good exercise sometimes is to just fly straight and level, not using the ailerons, and use the rudder to, keep the wings level. It's a pretty good exercise. But that was pretty exciting.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to show for folks that haven't seen it and don't really know what we're talking about. I'm going to show a few pictures of what it looks like, what this thing looks like, and this is off somebody's airplane. It's on Beach Talk, and this is all on the rear spar. I'm going to show you that spar here in a second, but you can see that round object is the heater duct, and that's the right aileron turnbuckle right below it. And you can see in this picture the safety wire is holding it all together, and when they took it off, it basically broke apart. And that is, let's get rid of that. And I'm going to show you where this is. This is the rear spar looking forward. This is actually on a P35, but you can see where all the cables run in here and intermix. So that kind of gives you an idea of where it is. And if I think the important thing in this particular situation is most people, when they maintain general aviation airplanes, they really only address ADs and things like that at the annual time. This happened in November. The AD was dropped in November with a 30-day effectivity date. So it should have been done by now, but I imagine there's quite a few Bonanzas out there where it hasn't been done. And I think that's kind of a critical thing. Virtually all the 33s, the Ks through, what is it? I can't remember offhand, but a pretty good section of the V-tails, some of the V30, up through the V35A, and then some V35Bs, some 36s, actually all the 36s, some about 800 or so of the A36s, the first A36s are affected by this AD. So I think it's a really good idea to look at it. When this happened to you, you tried to get with the FAA and sort this thing out. So what was your experience, and what were the results after you got on the ground?
Well, Scott, obviously, with the declaring of the emergency, there was going to have to be some communication with the FAA. After I landed, the tower wanted a phone call, which I gave them. But also with the loss of a primary flight control with NTSB 830, it's required to notify the NTSB as well. So this event occurred on Friday afternoon. Through the weekend, I didn't hear anything, but I can tell you that first thing Monday morning, before I was even able to give a call to my local FSDO, they reached out to me, and they very, very, very excitedly wanted to take a look at my airplane. They had, if I remember correctly, it was 3 FAA inspectors, operational, I think there was avionics and maintenance, and they wanted to look at the airplane. They also wanted the logbooks, to make copies of every page of the logbooks, because this is a serious event. So I asked them at that time if I needed to reach out to the NTSB, and they said no, that they were already in communication with the NTSB. So initially, I wasn't able to show them the airplane. I think they wanted to see it at lunchtime, and I was at work. And so I kind of told them, I can't show you the airplane right now. I'll get to you. Could we do it tomorrow? And no, the answer was no. We need to see the airplane today. And the feeling initially, I think they kind of felt like maybe there was some shoddy maintenance going on. Fortunately, all that went away very quickly, and they saw the airplane. Like I said, I go to an ABS shop. I'm not going to say that I have, expense spared maintenance, but certainly I try to prioritize my items and take care of everything that the shop brings up. As far as my records, fortunately, I had gone through most of my records at this point and tried to organize them with an AD compliance list and service bulletin compliance list. and make everything as close as I could to what I'm used to seeing at work with, business jet records. And so when I provided those records to them and they looked at the airplane quickly, that tension went away, and they just wanted to know what happened. And they wanted to get to the bottom of it too. The NTSB asked me if they could have the flight control cables. So the end result for me was not only did I replace the aileron cable, but something else we found as we started to get into the situation, Scott, was that I had two other cracked cables. One of those is the picture you have on the screen there. That was my elevator trim cable swaged in. So when I saw this, it wasn't a matter of let's just fix the ailerons. I said to my IA, I said, I want every cable on the airplane removed and replaced with new, and all the flight controls re-rigged. And because there's no way I could put my family or my wife or myself in this airplane and have any faith in it at this point, So not knowing what was going on, like I said, this was the first time this had happened to my IA. That was it. It was, let's just rip everything out and replace everything, which was a pretty extensive maintenance event. The takeaway was, he couldn't believe this because in the picture you could kind of see some light points on the film where the safety wire was wrapped around. And up until this point, during inspection, you look at the cable itself, you look at the safety wire, you look at the turnbuckle, and that was kind of it. What was beneath the safety wire on that swaged ending end had never been considered and never been inspected. And so that swaged in on my airplane, that safety wire, who knows when the last time that was off, And so I think that was the curveball that hit my shop and a lot of shops. This is simply not something that we had been looking for. It's not something that we've been inspecting. And the fault lies on no one other than, old man time.
Old man
and
time.
The fact that it's just an old airplane. It's a 66,
It is. Well, I'd say that what happened is maybe it's a little bit of corrosion, maybe it's just a little bit of working over time, but commonly you don't take some of the viewers have been asking about how do you check this, and what you do is you take the safety wire off completely, so then you can examine with a 10 times magnifier what is going on with the swaged end there of that cable. So you don't do that normally. Normally in maintenance you check, and if it doesn't look bad, then you don't do anything with it, because you can do more damage than just pulling it apart to inspect it. So typically that's not done. So I wouldn't say that was a bad maintenance practice, because not many people do it. It's just that it's time, and maybe we need to change our cables more often. So I'm not sure where that crack
Something
was.
else, Scott, if I could,
Go ahead.
I'll throw it in there. I don't know if other people are doing this. I know my shop is recommending it, but on all of the turnbuckles to cut the safety wire and inspect it, because like I said, in my airplane, for whatever reason, my airplane, 3,400-hour airplane, I'm the third owner. It's a beautiful airplane. It's well kept. It's not been beat. It's not been a training airplane. But I had two other cracked swaged ends that didn't even make it out of the airplane before they came apart. So had those given away in flight, it could have been a whole different story. So
Yes.
they're recommending, my shop is recommending, I think most shops are as well, to just cut the safety on all of them and re-safety them, because you just don't know what you're going to find. And to limit it to just the cable that's under the heater duct, I think is a little bit narrow in scope.
I agree. I think that's a prudent thing. As a matter of fact, when I do turnbuckles nowadays, I don't put safety wire. I use the clip versions. So you have a clip to stop the turnbuckle from moving, and you can see everything, and there's no interference. So just a real quick aside, if you're not sure whether or not this might apply to your airplane, let me turn the camera back on. Okay. For some reason my camera turns on and off. But I was going to say that the easiest way to determine is, if you really need to pull that rear spar cover off and take a look at this, is you look in the right wheel well, and if you see turnbuckles there, that's where Beech moved them, I think in 1977 time frame. And if you see turnbuckles there, then it probably doesn't apply to you as far as the AD goes. But I think your suggestion, Jeff, is a very good one. If it's an old airplane, you probably should replace the cables, or at least inspect them all at some point. It's a safety thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One fellow's asking, just curious, when is Jeff planning to replace the cables again? What do you think?
That sounds crazy, but believe it or not, I asked my mechanic. I said, is this something we should be cutting the safety wire every annual? Should I go ahead and order the next set of cables from McFarland
Yeah.
so we can have them ready to go? And he just laughed and he said, this airplane is older than you are, and it's been just fine. I think you're never going to have to mess with this again. So hopefully he's right. It wasn't cheap and it wasn't fun, but like I said in the beginning, that's one of those flying experiences that I'm better for it. But if I could go back and not go through it, I'd rather not go through it again.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's kind of the reason for the show, is hopefully some other people pay attention and start looking in a little bit deeper so we can avoid those kind of things. So here's...
And the other thing I was going to mention too, before this became an AD, when I would go to Sun and Fun or an ABS event, it was amazing how polarized the group was. There were people who immediately said, what part number is it? Where's it at? I'm going to call my mechanic right now, and the next time I'm home, it's going to the shop. We're going to cut that safety wire. And then I would talk to people that said, "Oh, my airplane's a Midwestern airplane, or it's a Southwest airplane, and there's no corrosion, and you're in a Florida salt air environment." And I think the bottom line is, I don't think there's any rhyme or reason necessarily with where the airplane lives. I think it's just a matter of that heater duct, especially dripping condensation on it, and I think that could happen no matter where you live, And as far as the tail, who knows? But I wouldn't want to bet my life or my airplane or my family on the odds that when my airplane's not one of the ones that are affected. It's in the big scheme of things, it's not a lot of money. Have your mechanic get in there, cut that safety wire. You could even cut your own safety wire and let him just do the inspection and re-safety. But it's just one of those things that needs to be done. It has to get done.
I totally agree. Yeah, here's some questions here. One fellow's asking, what's the alternate method to secure a turnbuckle? They have a clip version of a turnbuckle that you actually slip in and it clips onto the sides, so it locks it in instead of trying to use safety wire and tighten it around. Because you got to pull the safety wire pretty tight, and that puts stress on the turnbuckle and swedged ends itself. Somebody's asking what model your boat is. You've got a V35.
Yes, it's a 66, serial number 8203.
Okay. As far as I know, I think ABS is tracking this, and they say about 30 some odd airplanes they found problems with the aileron cable.
I'd heard a higher number.
Did you?
I was at the Daytona BBB event, and the number that Curtis Boulware threw out, I thought it was in excess of 50 at this point. I'm not saying those were completely broken, but they had found a crack or they had found a reason to replace a cable. So yeah. I think, like you said, I think there's still a considerable number of airframes that haven't been inspected. So I suspect that number is going to go up.
Yeah. It's a good thing to do. Let's see what other questions we have. One comment for those folks watching. I've been trying to reply to the chat, but for some reason, when I hit enter, it doesn't go. It doesn't enter. So I can't reply to the chat. So Marlon Sands says over 50 confirms what you heard. Actually what I think is, Dan Greider's pushing a grassroots, go back to grassroots training for pilot training, have a different view. He calls it the AQP flight review, where you focus on things that are actually killing people in general aviation. I think that maybe we ought to have a grassroots safety board. What I mean by that is, in the Air Force, we had a safety board that whenever we had an accident, a safety board did the first investigation, and then after that we had an accident investigation. And from the safety investigation, they would find out what happened. It's non-attributional. In other words, everybody could say what they think and what happened and not be worried about losing their job. And from that, they'd figure out changes in policy or procedure or something like that that needed to happen. And so I think that safety board kind of concept might work in GA. You know, to me, there's a lot of lessons learned. I think you mentioned that we were talking about this previously, that the FAA was actually using an accident where this happened several years ago, like 10 years ago or something like that. And they were using it as a learning tool for their accident investigators. Do you recall that? Am I
Yeah, that
remembering
was
correctly?
something that really surprised me. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, found uh, there was a Bonanza incident. I believe it was a V-35 a number of years ago that had the identical uh, happen to it. Aileron cable broke, right aileron full up, left aileron neutral. The pilot was able to maintain control of the airplane. Fortunately, he did get it back on the ground. And so this FAA training video snippet somebody had sent me, they had the exact same accident, and or not accident, but incident. And I never heard of it. My mechanic never heard of it. I don't think many people at all had heard of it, and it was just disappointing that here's something that could kill people. Who knows? There might have been other events where an aileron cable broke and the Bonanza went into a steep spiral, or the tail came off. Who knows? And maybe the pilot was blamed. Maybe the airframe was blamed. There's no way of knowing now at this point. It was just really surprising to me. I had a lot of faith that if something like this happened, surely there's going to be an AD. The FAA is going to know about it. It's going to get out there to the shops, and it's not going to be a surprise. So that was very sobering to me when this happened. That I wasn't the first one. This had happened at least one other time, a few times, I think.
Yeah.
I think Curtis Bulwer had told me about an accident that happened where the outcome wasn't as good. And where the system failed is it wasn't communicated and it didn't go forward, and other shops weren't brought into the loop. So I think what you're suggesting, Scott, is a great idea. Like it's overdue. It's needed in our industry.
I
And
think that
I think
what actually is happening is the FAA and the NTSB really don't have the resources to dig down in the weeds in general aviation. Honestly, I mean, I'm not putting them on saying, okay, they're not doing their jobs or anything. They're working pretty hard. And what they're focusing on, their resources, is, transport category airplanes. And then after that, they're going to look at charter airplanes because that affects the public, not necessarily the pilot population and whoever flies in GA, but it affects the entire public. So that's what they're focusing on, and I'm not hitting them on that. But what's falling through the cracks is we're not getting information about that, about the aileron brakes, and leading to, well, we need to improve some of our maintenance practices or what we look at, accidents in general. What's happening, what's killing people, is all those protrusions in the cockpit, is that survival? I mean, we look at what's happened in cars with airbags and other stuff like that, that it's just not happening in GA. We have the AmSafe, shoulder harnesses. That's about the biggest safety innovation we've had in 20 or 30 or 40 years, something like that. So I think having some kind of grassroots board or something that collects all these things and asks the NTSB to collect certain information that will add to the general knowledge so we can improve aviation safety, both from a crash perspective and from an operational perspective. Anyway, that's my nickel.
absolutely couldn't agree more.
All right, let's see if we have any other questions. One fellow's asking, Lazaro's asking, what's the root cause of failure? Metal fatigue and corrosion. I would say both. In your instance, would you say it was corrosion or just metal fatigue? Did you actually see corrosion?
Yeah, there was, ironically, at that annual, that duct that connects the plenum to the baggage heap in my model, uh, we replaced that because that tube was decaying and it was brittle and it just needed to be replaced. So we were right in that area and looked at everything. And again, this didn't stand out because it was below that safety wire. So I definitely think in my case it was that tube. I know I've talked to a few people that have simply capped off that plenum and removed that baggage heat from the situation to avoid using that black tube. I've heard from a few mechanics that black tube, when it gets moisture, the moisture that drips out of it can be corrosive. So I've heard of some people capping it off. I've heard of some people using a different kind of tubing. So I'm not sure. We left the black tube in ours. We're probably going to change that tube at the next annual. Um, but I think, yeah, in my case, I think it was corrosion.
Yeah, I liked scat tubing instead of that old stuff. But let's see. Here's another question: are the cables typically inspected in a pre-buy? Well, I actually do a fair number of pre-buy inspections, and I haven't been doing those. I mean, not inspecting them like that. That's pulling the safety wire off and looking underneath it. That's an awful lot of work, actually. You got to pull the seats, you got to pull the rear cover on the affected airplanes to get to it. So that's not a normal situation. What I do nowadays, I've done about 4 since the AD. I look for that AD. So has it been done? Somebody's accomplished it. So hopefully that answers that question. That adds, if you did the inspection, you'd essentially be doing an AD compliance for the inspection, and that would add probably 4 to 5 hours to every one of those. Let's see, any other questions here? Leave it open if anybody'd like to shoot us a question. All right. Well, I appreciate you telling your story, Jeff. I think it was a really good story to tell, and you did a great job doing it. I congratulate you on your reaction in the air. You flew the airplane first. You figured out what to do, and you successfully landed it. And I'd say that's pretty awesome. I'm proud of you for that.
Well, I appreciate it, Scott. Thanks for having me. And I don't say that it's beyond anybody that's driving a Bonanza around right now to do what I did. It's back to what we talked about earlier. It's just fly the airplane, man. Never give up on it, and take it all the way to the ground. And if you do that, you're going to make it out of most of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing you mentioned, Bob Hoover. One thing that's always rung clear with me is I had an engine failure, and two things ran through my head. And one of those was Bob Hoover's advice: is fly as far into the accident as possible, and that's your best
Absolutely.
chance. So that's
Yep.
pretty awesome advice. So I think we'll probably wrap it up here. I appreciate everybody that tuned in for the live stream. I think it went really well. We told a really important story, and if you liked it, subscribe to the channel. You get notifications. Hit the bell for the next time we do one of these. And I think. Sun and fun next year. We got to meet up. How's that?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It sounds good, Scott. Thanks for everything you do. Thanks for your channel. Like I said, great content, and well done.
All right. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
thanks for watching.